Good evening, everybody. I'm Charlie Jeffrey, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of York, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome you both in person in the lecture theatre here and online. Welcome to all. To welcome our speakers this evening, who I'll introduce in a moment, as we all mark the opening of the Anne Lister College. Now, we're absolutely delighted that the university's 10th residential college has been named after Anne Lister, a woman who was a scholar, businesswoman, prolific diarist, and often described as the first modern lesbian. Anne had strong connections to York, including attending Manor House School, which is now part of our city centre campus at the King's Manor, but also her unofficial marriage to her partner Anne Walker in the Church of the Holy Trinity in 1834. Her name was chosen for the college from a list of notable people with connections to the university or to the city of York, which were put forward by students and staff. We had a lot of names put forward, but Anne's was by far and away the most popular one, I think by an order of 10 to 1 or thereabouts. So a pretty clear decision. And there are good reasons. She was pretty extraordinary. She had a voracious appetite for knowledge in many domains, social and scientific, but no opportunity at that time for formal higher education. So she taught herself with a real dedication to what we would now call scholarship. She was canny and successful in business when being a woman in business life was, especially in coal mining, very rare. And she pursued her life and lived her sexuality as she saw fit, at a time when women had few rights and living as a lesbian was both a social taboo and criminalised behaviour. To celebrate someone who fought, dismissed, and conquered these many obstacles to equality of opportunity resonates so well with this university's values and its commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. So now we have the Anne Lister College, located on campus east, just a few minutes walk away from this building, and it will in due course be home to almost 800 students, the first of them already in residence, and I imagine some of them in the lecture theatre this evening. The college development has been designed to optimise the surrounding landscape. It's been built with respect for the ecological diversity we have around here, especially around the lake, which we've consciously rewilded over the last decade or so. The college also echoes some of the architectural features of our first residential colleges built over on Campus West back in the 1960s. So in a sense, evoking the founding spirit of the university for a new era. Before I welcome tonight's panel, I'd first like to take an opportunity to thank those involved in the process of building the college. There are far too many to name in person, but I'd like to make particular mention of Equitix, Graham Construction, numerous colleagues from the university's departments of Technology, Estates and Facilities and Finance, and also Professor Ambrose Field, who was chair of the project board. So to tonight's event. Now, to help us mark the opening of the college, it's a great pleasure to welcome our expert speakers this evening, who will be taking us on a journey into Anne Lister's life story and exploring the making of the TV series about Anne Lister, Gentleman Jack. So we have Sally Wainwright, an honorary graduate and former student of this university, an award-winning TV writer, producer and director from Yorkshire, who wrote and executive produced Gentleman Jack. We have Laurie Shannon, Franklin Bliss Snyder Professor of English Literature at Northwestern University in Chicago and coordinator of the Anne Lister Society. And Laurie's come here despite all the challenges of travel in the COVID era in order to be with us tonight, and we're truly grateful for that. And then we have Gary Brannan, who is Keeper of Archives at the Borthwick Institute for Archives at the university, where, amongst other things, a copy of Anne Lister's will is housed. I think there can be no doubt this is going to be a brilliant discussion, and it's great to be able to introduce a brilliant chair who will guide things with consummate skill. Emma Barnett, the main presenter of Women's Hour. You will know that Emma is an outstanding broadcaster, winner of many awards. She joined Women's Hour after a period on BBC Radio 5 Live, also presents Newsnight on BBC Two, writes a column for the newspaper, has made films for The One Show, presented the Andrew Marr Show, Politics Live, all sorts of TV, news, current affairs and debate programmes on BBC Sky and ITV, and a whole series of radio documentaries for Radio 4 and the World Service. So, ladies and gentlemen, both here and online, please welcome me, join me and welcome me. Join me in welcoming tonight's speakers and our chair, Emma Barnett. Over to you, Emma.
Well, I think I'd always like to take inspiration from the crowd. Thank you very much for having us this evening. And it's a real treat to be here in York, which I adore, and I'm still getting to know. And I think Anne Lister would approve of a T-shirt I've spotted in the audience that we have here tonight. This woman here is writing on her T-shirt, or has written on her T-shirt, "Exist loudly." So we'll go with that. Thank you very much. Always like to see what's in front of me, and it's nice to be with people again in person. And what a panel we have this evening. And as someone who obviously spends a lot of time talking to women and about women, a quote from Anne Lister, I think Women's Hour would approve of: "I cannot live without female company, without someone to interest me." So the problem has been we haven't necessarily been as interested in women's lives or women's stories for all that long, and lots of them have not been known about or have been lost forever until people like yourself, Sally, come along and help us all understand. So I thought we'd start by hearing a bit from each of our panellists about their careers, briefly, I suppose, away from Anne Lister, and then how they connect to her. So, Sally Wainwright, let's start with you.
Okay, I was asked to talk about myself for like 5 minutes, so I can't talk for 5 minutes. So I'm going to read mine out, if that's all right. Sorry, if that's embarrassing.
You do write very well, so...
Well, can't go wrong then. Hello, I'm Sally Wainwright. I'm a television dramatist and director. My current workload includes post-production on Gentleman Jack 2. I'm also writing scripts for and prepping for production a new British 8-part drama series for Disney called The Ballad of Renegade Nell, about a fictional highwaywoman. I'm also nearly finished writing and prepping for production the third and final 6-part instalment of Happy Valley, which we start filming in January.
Don't you love how they're going, ooh? It's very panto.
Yeah, it's very encouraging, thank you. I started my writing and directing career here at the University of York, where I read English and related literature. I took a play that I'd written and directed here on campus to the Edinburgh Festival in 1986. The English department also allowed me to present the production as part of my degree, which I will always be very grateful for, as that formal recognition of the quality of what I was writing and producing gave me a huge and much-needed boost of confidence. After graduating, I went to live in London and did an 18-month stint driving double-decker buses. And I got my first professional job as a staff writer on The Archers on Radio 4 in 1988. From there, I went on to work at Granada Television in Manchester, writing scripts for Coronation Street, as well as a string of other ongoing dramas, including Children's Ward, Bad Girls, and Playing the Field. I got my first original drama series, At Home with the Braithwaites, commissioned in 1999. Since then, I've continued to write my own original dramas, which have included Spark House, The Amazing Mrs. Pritchard, Bonkers, Unforgiven, Scott and Bailey, Last Tango in Halifax, Happy Valley, To Walk Invisible, and most recently, Gentleman Jack. So on to Anne Lister. Anne Lister has always fascinated me. I grew up in Halifax, and from being very little, I was a frequent visitor to Shibden Hall. I was always drawn to Anne Lister. I was always aware that there was something intriguing about her. I think I knew somehow, it must have been in the ether, that she was gay and that she'd written a diary, but as a teenager in the late 70s and early 80s, I found it next to impossible to find out anything much more about her. This was before the internet, when you can't just press a button and, you know. And I certainly had no idea that her 26-volume, 5 million-word diary Her travel notes and her letters were kept in a temperature-controlled safe inside the archives in Halifax Library. It wasn't until Jill Liddington's book Female Fortune was published in 1998 that I got a first really focused hit of just who Anne Lister was. Anne is, of course, primarily known to us as a prolific diarist who wrote partially in code to record her sexual relationships with other women. But Anne was also a formidable polymath. She not only wrote profusely, she read voraciously and was fascinated by a bewildering array of subjects, which she had the mental bandwidth to delve into in extraordinary depth: medicine, surgery, science, geology, botany, engineering, coal mining, land management, maths, politics, current affairs, literature, classics, languages, travel. She was a scientist, a traveller, and a culture vulture. And Anne didn't just have a brilliant mind. She was also blessed with being remarkably physically fit. In 1838, having ascended Mont Perdu a year earlier, which no one believed, she made the first recorded ascent of Mount Venamal in the Pyrenees. What made me want to write about this fantastic woman is simply that she is very, very exciting and uplifting. She was profoundly intelligent, remarkably physically fit. She was blessed with very robust mental health, and she had the most optimistic, can-do attitude of anyone you've ever met. Come across, not met, sorry. She's a great example of a woman who tore up the rule book for women and rewrote it her way, all 5 million words of it. I consider myself profoundly lucky to have been the person who was in the right place at the right time and in the right company to have made this big-budget, high-octane international drama for the BBC and HBO that's based on this jaw-droppingly epic, no longer secret, Diaries of Anne Lister.
Thank you. So, Professor Laurie Shannon, what have you got?
What have I got to try to come down to the same landing point as Sally? In my regular life, I'm a Shakespeare scholar, and I work on a variety of subjects, mostly with an intellectual history perspective. And I'm working on a project about the concept of nature, which I feel like is one of the richest concepts in the language and the slipperiest. So I'm working on this Shakespeare project on the capacities of the word nature to mean different things. I had heard of Anne Lister nowhere near as much as I had heard of Sally Wainwright, and watched Gentleman Jack as it unfolded in little bits by week in the States, and was completely taken with Anne Lister's, I think, quite original understanding of the word nature, right? It was all nature. If you leave nature behind, you become alienated from who you actually are, as opposed to the quite commonplace idea that LGBTQ experience was unnatural. She had the contrary view, so I was very piqued. How did she get that view? What did she build that view from? I was down at the Warburg Institute as a fellow in London. I was really supposed to be working on Shakespeare. And like Sally, there's just something irresistible about Anne Lister's energy and emphasis. So I took the train to Halifax. I thought, I'm going to go look at the lecture notes, see what she has to say about natural history. She took 30-session courses in Paris. Her lecture notes are massive, not that she went to 5 lectures and took notes. And happened to be taking a break from the archive. I thought I might write a little article about Anne Lister's understanding of nature. And also, just lucky being in the right place at the right time, happened to get connected with Sally through Pat Esgate, who's running the Anne Lister Birthday Week celebrations. And I heard there was interest in forming an Anne Lister Society. And so I was lucky to be there and have conversations with Sally, with Ann Choma and Pat Esgate to launch an association. It's loose still, the sole purpose of which is to foster understanding of Anne Lister's life, and also to create forum for what, Sally, I think you originally called serious conversation about Ann Lister. In the COVID time, we launched, and we've exist on Twitter, and you can all follow us on Twitter to keep up, but I'm very proud to say that we will be hosting a 2-day conference with papers on nothing but Ann Lister all day, morning to night, in Halifax as part of the birthday celebrations in April, God willing, and hopefully everything going the right way. What I'm really glad to bring to the giant collective project that is Ann Lister is, in addition to historians having understood the historical importance of her managing to survive the way she did, I also feel that that diary is a hidden masterpiece in the English literary tradition. And so I'm interested in it from a literary standpoint, and also felt that Gentleman Jack, one of the most unique things about it is the way it makes a riveting text a protagonist in a series. It makes that text live, and that's what hooked me to get involved.
Thank you very much. I do just love already on the questions coming in. Will there be another series of Gentleman Jack anytime soon? Is a repeat question here. People are hungry for more content. We'll get to some of those in just a moment, but I should say, think of some questions. I'll come to you here, and also do post them anytime on for those who are watching at home, and hello. Let's hear from you, Gary. How do you come into this?
Sure. Thank you for asking me along. When I was very kindly asked along to this event tonight to talk about Ann Lister and archives, I was, and to some extent still am, absolutely petrified at the thought of doing so. So thank you for your warm welcome. Because what was I actually going to say in this company in the audience as well, of people who know so much about Ann Lister? So I went back to first principles, and to me, Ann's story represents to me an extraordinary example of archival survival. If there's one thing that I do know about, it's archival survival. So I thought I'd go from that basis. We know her diaries are over 5 million words, and when you piece together the aspects of herself, it's a huge achievement. And those diaries, of course, are held by my absolutely wonderful colleagues at West Yorkshire Archive Service at Calderdale in Halifax. We've mentioned already the thrill of the archive, of seeing Ann Lister up close, something I have felt in the preparation, certainly for this event. So where do I come in, really, in terms of the university? Well, I'm Keeper of Archives at the Borthwick Institute, and we hold many, many millions of documents, ranging across many things: television, production, chocolate making, Southern Africa, mental health, but also our founding records are the records of the established church. And it's through that lens where we start to see Ann and her life from that York perspective. And I think it's certainly something worth looking at. From my experience, seeing Ann coming through this blanket of dull conformity, even in dry ecclesiastical records, say something about her and her spirit. In summary, a lot of what we hold to Ann Lister is birth, death, and taxes. Quite honestly, that's the majority of that which we've got. So we've got records that document her birth in parish register transcripts. We've already mentioned the records of Holy Trinity, Gudrumgate, the place where she solemnised her marriage to Anne Walker in 1834. And we got the records of the probate courts that really solemnise her death. We know from her diaries that Anne's life is really well bound up with York, centre of a commercial life, a social life, spending, I think I did a rough count, it's something like 271 days in York, 1817 to 1824. So it's an interesting orbit to add to that what we know about her life in Halifax. And one thing I found from doing this prep for tonight was the way we can start to link collections of other women that we hold into the world of Ann Lister. So the Crewe family's records that we hold, we know that they are starting to cross over into the social circles, people like Willoughby Crewe, and their links through to the Lawton family as well. So you start to see, what I started to find in my experience researching this was how you start to see things through Anne's focus. So we just got a couple of images just to talk through. I thought I couldn't bring some friends with me, to be honest, so I couldn't bring the originals, so I've brought some pictures. This is quite a seminal moment, I suppose, in Anne's life. This represents the day that she went to Holy Trinity, Gudrumgate, in March 1834. It was Easter Sunday. It had been a day of great celebration and joy, or as much joy as you could get from the established church in 1834. And what you find from the archives is how they can add more to that day. So looking at the records, we know that the church spent more on the sacrament wine than they did on coals at that time. And they spent more on bread and ale for a single day than they did on candles. So you can imagine quite a cold, dark church. And in between these two entries is where Anne Walker and Anne Lister held their sacrament. And in a different world, their marriage entry would be right there. Instead, it is between those lines, in the silence between lines that hides many lives. I thought that was quite an interesting one to show. Anne's next appearance, just move on, is in her will. We've mentioned the will. There's a copy of Anne's will. Anne held land in both provinces of the Church of England, so we have a copy of the will that was actually proved in London, and there we have Anne Lister's will. It's quite a long will. She bequeaths everything to my friend, Miss Anne Walker, now living with me at Sibden aforesaid. And really, it's a 13-page document of very complex landholding trusts, which says, again, a lot about Anne. Even in the most formulaic and sometimes still most personal of documents in a will, she's still coming through. And I'll just move on to the next image. We've got another one where she specifically mentions there Miss Anne Walker. And just as I'd like to end, and I would like to end with an apology, if that's okay. Any of you that may have looked at Anne Lister's Wikipedia entry, the font of all academic knowledge, as we know, will note it does say that Anne Walker was of unsound mind and did not leave a will, therefore, because she was not fit mind to make one. And when you look at the referencing for that, it points back to the Borthwick Institute's website and its page on Anne Lister. I'd like to apologise. Anne Lister did, in fact, make a will, and we do have a copy. So if we move on, we see the will of Anne Walker. So we're able just to shine a little bit more light on Anne and the end of her life. Even though this is referencing Jill Liddington's Female Fortune, it was just nice to bring that out and correct that little bit of erasure from the record. And one thing I think that, just to sum it up, and when we start thinking about the relationships we're going to talk about tonight, when you look at the last page, she mentions bequests in Anne's will, and she specifically refers to her as Mrs. Anne Lister. I think that's quite a touching thing in a very complex 11-page document that it was an absolute pleasure to dive into in the last week or so. And I think that really sums it up. There's always more to discover when you look in the archives, and Anne Lister is no different, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to link her to the collections that we hold at York. Thank you.
Gary, I feel like you're going now. You've said goodbye and an apology, and that's it.
If you want.
No. I just love the fact, and we've got to the will, but I think we need to go back and actually talk about the life. And I know that it's been mentioned a couple of times that there'll be lots of people who know a lot about her, but I do think we should also cater for those who've come to this who want to learn more and might not know that much, or what they do know, there are some gaps in the knowledge. So I did just want to go back to first principles and perhaps start with you, Sally, on... could you tell us a bit about the beginning of her life and how she was the way she was?
Well, she was born in 1791. She grew up in East Yorkshire. She was the eldest daughter, but she had two older brothers. She was a tomboy right from being tiny. She went to the manor school in York, where she started her first relationship with Eliza Rain. And she, you get the idea that right from an early age, she knew her own mind, and she knew, and she didn't feel compromised by it. She spent a lot of time in York. She actually got kicked out of the manor school, asked to leave temporarily, but she never went back. And it was in York that she met Mariana Belcombe, who became Mariana Lawton, through Isabella Norcliffe and the Norcliffe family, who were landed gentry, and for her it was a step up to get to know people like that, like the Norcliffes. She was always socially ambitious, and of course she had a relationship with Isabella Norcliffe, so that was when she kind of moved out into society and started to develop a kind of network of female relationships. Where they did have relationships and were quite articulate about it within their own sort of milieu.
And her ambition, what you're talking about there, is fascinating as well, because she didn't want to and wouldn't rely on a man for it. She had to find a different way to have some of those ambitions realised, didn't she?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she ever entertained relationships with men at all. I think there was some reference to, I can't remember the name of the guy, Montague, Mr. Montague's Farewell Verses. So this guy had written some kind of love letter to her, or some poetry or something. But she never really entertained that at all. She was very clear that wasn't for her. I think there's some reference in the diary later on as well to the idea that she could marry for a title and money, but she just didn't see that as an option. It just wasn't how she saw the world at all.
And Laurie, to come back to what you were saying about nature and what she saw as natural, I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise that someone knew their own mind and followed it in some ways, and yet it seems the most transgressive thing for a woman at that time to be so definitively what she knew she was.
Yes, and I think that one of the most amazing of her many successes is to build a knowledge base from which that makes sense, right? And the idea that you are created as you are supposed to be here. Whatever it's as is, you're supposed to be here. So she really drew on theology to understand that whatever specificity she had was intended by God, right? And so, in a sense, to deviate from that was, in a way, sinful, right? Because if this is what your mandate is, that's what you should do. And one of the interesting ways that she works that out is to combine, honestly, a reading of Genesis and the creation narrative, in a sense, at a deep level, with classical natural histories and emerging natural history that she went to study in Paris, for example, all of which was about figuring out the specific nature of the thing, the thinginess of this thing, rather than getting it into a general category. And so she understood that having that nature wasn't a defect or even a limitation, but in a way, not even a permission, but a patent, right? Almost a patent in a certain way of being. So I think of her in many ways, one of which is, as an intellectual, assembling a bunch of intellectual resources to inform a decision that might also just be metabolic at a certain level. I'm going for it. I'm going to be who I am. But she also had the kind of larger infrastructure of thought behind it that I think is part of what fueled a confidence, I think, that has struck everyone as extraordinary.
And come back to that confidence in just a moment, but the idea also, though, of having to build that basis, is that because around her, Laurie, there wouldn't have been, for instance, anyone who was a lesbian? Do we know about any of those influences?
Well, it's interesting, and we quoted the phrase, the first modern lesbian, which is often circulated as a quotation, because I think everyone's aware that she's not the first lesbian. We're not sure how we're going to define lesbian, nor are we sure how to define modern. There's a lot at stake in modern as well, but we also know what we mean, because she had a sense of self, right, that was unmitigated by, there was shame. She overcame some shame, but there wasn't fear, okay? So there's that. But it was not necessarily the case that Anne Lister understood herself as the member of an identity group, right? She was not looking for others like her. She was looking for a companion who was of the fairer sex, but not necessarily like she was, okay? And there's an extended interaction in the early years, Miss Pickford, who is at least I haven't read the entire diary yet, but is my only sense of her really coming across someone who was actually quite like her. And you don't find her wanting necessarily to bond with a person who's just got the same identity marks as she has. It's almost like it confuses her system of, I am like a fingerprint of specificity, supposed to be like this. What if there's another one a little bit like me?
There was another woman who, is my microphone working? I don't think it was.
It is when you tickle it, but not.
It might be now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is that the first time you've been able to hear me at all? There was another woman, very much like Miss Pickford, who, I can't remember where it was, but somebody suggested Anne might like to go travelling with this woman because she was very much like her, and she actually avoided her.
Yeah, it was someone in a neighboring county, I think. It was someone had heard of this other person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not what she was looking for. And if community is what we understand the modern piece to mean, then she wasn't modern in that sense. But in terms of an executive acting woman, we're still catching up with Anne Lister.
Is that why I was just going to come back, and I wanted to ask about the archive and Anne Lister becoming sort of modern day famous in just a moment. But I noticed that both you and Laurie, Sally, say you sound like once you start getting into Anne Lister or reading about Anne Lister, it's addictive. And you talked about it being uplifting. And, you know, for those who haven't read the material or engaged as much as you have, what is that and why is that?
I think it's, first of all, the most exciting thing to me about Anne Lister is how clever she was. She had this fantastic brain. She was like 3 steps ahead of, a bit like you, about 3 steps ahead of everybody else in the room, you know. And that's exciting in itself because it comes through in the diary. But combined with this real optimism about the world, about life, she had this Panglossian optimism, despite all the, the slings and arrows of having grown up with people being rude to her about what she looked like and how she walked and all that sort of thing.
Imagine if she'd been on Instagram. That would have been knocked out. No, I'm joking. But no, that optimism is probably a lovely thing to read.
The optimism, that's really loud now, isn't it? That optimism, which is also combined to her religious belief, but it's the optimism, the confidence, the chutzpah, she was just really... she did what she wanted to do all the time, more or less, and she didn't let anything inhibit her or stop her, and that's what I find uplifting. That's why I found her a really exciting character to try and write about, because I think she's an inspiration to all women, not just gay women. It's like to anyone who feels inhibited. I mean, it makes me feel confident just reading the journal, just when I'm writing it and going through, what I have to read to get my stories constructed. You feel good, you come away from your day's work thinking, wow, and you think, well, it literally gives you confidence.
So this is why you cheated on Shakespeare when you should have been focusing.
He's taking care of himself just fine. I'm sure he can wait.
He hasn't waited till now to get a college named after him.
Yeah. We're ahead of him there too, right? I think what I would add to Sally's remarks, and I agree completely, is that the confidence and the optimism aren't cheap. They aren't just glib. They aren't coming from someone who doesn't know better, right? Who doesn't know that it's hard to have optimism. And so what I think is so important about the diary as literature, but also the diary as ethics, is that, what are we? We get up. We gather a self every day against the slings and arrows, whatever the day is going to bring. And we climb the mountain of that day. And it's ethically significant to walk with Anne Lister through that process. You can think about that process and confidence and optimism at a high philosophical level, but it's so moving to see her every day rationally construct the basis for optimism. And I certainly know that during COVID time, when we've had all these different challenges than we've ever known, like how to hold your world up every day is something she really gave a lot of attention to, and earned the optimism or built it. And I think that's the kind of, if you think of literature as not just reflecting us back or telling us we already know, but giving us an ethical engagement from which we take away something new, that's one more of her many gifts, I think.
Yeah, it's true. There's a consistency and strength to it, isn't there?
Yeah. Gary, to come to the actual archive and the materials itself, does that come through when you have read what you have read, and how does that? You sort of gave a bit of a flavour that it was shining through compared to other materials of the time.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you say about this gravitational magnetism. Almost, I found myself you do find yourself looking through that lens. It comes right through and say, I wonder how they fit into this puzzle. And you find, in my case, it was, oh, I wonder if we've got this, I wonder if we have something else. And I was starting to put together a huge document now of all the kind of wills and baptisms and marriages that make up the Anne Lister universe, as it were. Because they all, when you start looking through the diaries, you see how it all feeds in together. And it is kind of addictive, because, I'm on my third book now, I think, that I've gone through and getting into this. And it's really interesting. And, yeah, I think, the ecclesiastical record-making structures, you've come for a thrill and you're getting one now, they are not designed really to let individuals come through. They are there to, it's a bit of a meat grinder. Things go in, you produce the thing, it is done, it is proven, it is gone. I think even in, if we look at Anne's will in its own, as one example in this, there's a lot of provision both for sons and for daughters as well, which is not an unusual thing to do, but it jumps out in that sense. And I think some of that kind of continual revision and thinking come through, because there's 3 codicils on this will. It's been altered 3 times since it was made. I think 2 of the codicils are within about a week or 2 of the will being made, so that constant thought process, that's quite rare that you would see that many codicils on a will. You probably get to the point there where you might just redraft it, but it's that kind of constant, no, we're going to revise this. No, there's this I haven't thought about. Actually, I need to think about the mortgages as well. Coming back, that thinking and revision and that awareness of what's needed to do. And when you look at the work that's going into both Anne Lister and Anne Walker making their wills, because they're kind of making them at the same time, aren't they? From my understanding. There's that constant process of revision and thought and seeing what needs to be done, and that's rare. Often these things can, quickly drafted, just exist. This is a document that's living just like the diary.
Well, having just made a will, I don't want to edit it because I have to keep paying the lawyer, and the whole thing's depressing as it is. But through history, the archive has shown us these sorts of things, and a theme that's coming through is a question that on the questions from home. Thank you for those, really great ones. But I also had it as well, which was that yes, she wrote this diary, yes, it was huge, and yes, there are all these documents, but and you've used the word ethical already, but what are the thoughts that you have on the panel? I'll start with you, Sally, on her being so well known now, and this being so public, and the way that we can feel about that. I mean, you're totally to blame, but no, obviously mainly in a great way, because you wanted her to be known and her story to be known. Sure. But what do you think she'd make of it, and how this is now in terms of us chewing over, there's a society and everything?
I mean, I've thought a lot about how she would respond to us knowing so much about her private life. But I think she'd be pretty thrilled to know how famous she was now, to be honest. I think her diary is, as Laurie says, it is a hidden, secret masterpiece of English literature that is now out there for people to study and talk about, and they're going to more and more now. And I think when she was writing that diary, she must have known. She could choose to destroy it at any time. We know she destroyed a lot of letters, quite explicit letters or at least intimate letters that her and Mariana would write to each other. So she always had the option to destroy that diary if she wanted to. She could have told Anne Walker to destroy it when she knew she was dying. So I do tend to think that she knew she'd created something pretty extraordinary. I think she had the intelligence to know that she created something.
And even though there was code within there, do you think she wanted it to be decoded?
It's tempting to think that she had the foresight to know that one day people would get this. But even HBO. It's kind of an impossible question, But
it's just an interesting one to ponder, isn't it, Laurie? Because of how much it gives, and how what you could glean from her personality and what she'd make of that.
Yeah, and I think that it's really clear, as Sally says, these would have been burned most likely. I mean, had not a series of archival survival miracles occurred. And I think there must have been 2 of the 24 big volumes, the large-scale format volumes that were with her when she died in Russia, based on the time that she was out there and what's in which volume. So that means those 2 volumes went all the way the furthest she had ever been from Shibden, where she died, and Anne Walker got them back. So there was a consistency between the two of them about keeping those diaries intact. That's just interesting, right? Because they are dangerous in certain obvious ways. And I like to kind of connect this without ever thinking Anne Lister imagined she would die. I mean, she wrote a will because you must do so, but I can't picture her imagining she would die, and then what would happen to anything. The care taken on these diaries, I like to read it next to the many musings you do see. She often describes it as building castles, right? That she's musing, building castles in the air of someday publishing. I think she meant the travel diaries, which would be highly publishable in her milieu. She was a voracious reader of travel accounts. Probably that's what she meant when she dreamt of publishing. But she did dream of publishing, and now it came out to be this.
By the way, we have a few messages here going whoop whoop for archival survival. That's definitely a message that I'm sure you'll be thrilled about. Gary, how do we have them? How did we actually get them?
The diaries or the will?
Either or.
Either.
I mean,
well, the diaries, I think, are a really good example that the best agent of archival survival is forgetfulness and time. You know, having them, so they were walled away, weren't they, at one point? Or they were hidden away behind panelling. That's a really good way for things to survive. The other way is people open a room full of stuff and go, absolutely too much for me to deal with now, and close the door, which is how the will survives, quite honestly, is that there was just too much paper to deal with, and it gets to an age where we as people put meaning on it for being old. So Anne's will is one of, it's something like 750,000 that we hold dating back to 1389. At the Borthwick, so it's part of this long chain. So Anne really demonstrates the two agents, one of intentionally squirreling something away and then forgetting, and then coming back to it later with the evidence of time and interest, and someone having the time actually to work on them and understand them, especially through the code. It's not like there's a key for understanding it; it's an intentional puzzle to solve. Whereas with the will, it's good record keeping in the church and just the business of things, meaning you can't get rid of it, and then someone going, can't get rid of these, they're too old. And someone like me comes along and puts them in nice boxes.
There you go. I like to get the detail. Always like the detail. Just talking of detail, because we've also spoken about her will several times, how she dies is an incredible story in itself. And I know, again, picking up about 3 or 4 of the questions that have come through have been, when are you writing more? Are we going to get a lot more? I know you mentioned you're in post-production for the latest series, but you want to go, don't you, the whole way, hopefully?
I'd like to. I mean, we've just finished filming season 2. That's going to come out next year. That goes up to September 1835. So, you know, I mean, we're dependent on the audience, getting a good audience.
That's your job.
If people watch it, it will get recommissioned. If they don't, it might not. But yeah, in my ideal world, I would like to go right up to when she dies in 1840.
And how did she die?
She was travelling with Anne Walker. She was in Georgia. They'd been to Kutaisi. I think they'd travelled away from Kutaisi, and she'd been. The new information is coming out about this all the time, but she was bitten by some kind of fever-carrying tick. And we now know she was bitten in her left leg, in her thigh.
Yeah, she describes removing this, whatever it was, bug. It's very unclear what bug.
Yeah.
It's been described as a tick, but I'm not sure that's what it was.
So she was aware that she'd been bitten.
Yeah.
She had time to write it down.
Yeah, the last diary
Always.
entry's on the 11th of August, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she died on the 22nd of September.
Right.
So it took her a long time to die, and it sounds like it developed into some kind of encephalitis. So she would...
beside herself, yeah.
And she was 49?
49, yeah.
And I mean, in terms of just taking it to what, and I'm going to actually open up the questions, so I really want to give you an opportunity, but just taking it to the fact that there is now a college named after, you know. Why do you think that's important, Laurie? Because, of course, for students coming through to walk through a building that's named for her, what message, because I'm aware some of them will be watching tonight or with us tonight, what message should they take from that, or would you hope they took from that?
There are like levels of messages, right? The first most just electrifying message frankly, is for LGBTQ students who suddenly have a dazzling new ancestor who authorizes their lives. That's just, you can't measure that. But the next level, of course, is nobody here imagines Annelisters only for LGBTQ people. And as we've been trying to say, reading those diaries is going to ethically move the needle for everyone, right? Anyone who's ever experienced self-doubt, anybody immune to that? I don't think so. So it's a great primer on how to exist. And what more appropriate thing could there be at a university? And so I really think the University of York has taken inclusion to the next level. We're used to thinking about inclusion as there are events, there is programming. And I think that, I mean, it's just so moving that the University of York, both with Ann Lister College and with David Cato College, both of them, has committed to a durable LGBTQ landmark, but made both of those landmarks part of our common history. And that's just more than inclusion, right? That's incorporation. And so I think that the act of having made both of these namings is just going to really resonate well beyond the University of York, I think.
Sally, if you've never read anything about Ann Lister and you wanted to have this life-affirming experience, where would you start? Of course, obviously watch your work, but reading something, what would you start with?
I would start with Jill Liddington's work, Female Fortune, which was the book I first read that really turned me on to
The one you mentioned.
her. Yeah, but Jill also wrote a fantastic book called Presenting the Past, which, just going back to wills and the survival of the diary and that sort of thing, Presenting the Past has got a fantastic section in it about how the diary actually survived, because there were times when it could have, you know, it wasn't just neglecting the cupboard. There were times when one of her descendants, not direct descendants, but one of the other listers who came after her, did crack the code in the 1890s, and he was advised to burn them by a friend of his who he'd been working on with this, and he refused to. And you know, there's in the book Presenting the Past, that is a fantastic read, and I would encourage anyone to read it if they're interested in that. There's been several times. I mean, that's a drama in itself. You could write a film about. One could write a film about how the diary, the diary has survived.
When you finished your current,
people made very conscious choices not to destroy that diary, and there were people who could easily have done so.
I find that so interesting to think about these gatekeepers and these sort of security guards almost throughout history and why they've done it. Okay, that is enough from my head and questions. Yes, we have a question up there, and we have some microphones coming. And I will also have a little look through this. I have tried in some of my questions to incorporate. Good evening, hello.
Hello, I have a question for Laurie, because Sally mentioned that Anne had a lot of lovers and that they talked very openly about that within their milieu. And having read the diary myself, it sounds like on the one hand, she, just in terms of ethics, on the one hand, she made very conscious, what's the word I'm looking for, commitments to people like her lover Mariana. But on the other hand, she was constantly sleeping with other women. And like in lots of different situations. And when she went to Paris and she went to live with another woman, it was like a constant conflict, both between her and Mariana and also internally. So I wondered where that came into her building like an ethical theory almost, because it sounds kind of unethical that she knew she was hurting people but kept on doing it.
I think that's somewhat of a modern take on what was happening there. It's not like it was an infinite number of women. I mean, she does say, the girls all like me, I've never been refused, which is important from an ethical standpoint as well. But I think that it's even more important to understand that she basically never jettisoned anybody either. But it's a set of people that she remains in communication with. And does she understand it as the strictest Victorian monogamy? It's not yet Victorian times in a deep way. And so when I was invoking the word ethical earlier, I meant especially the sense one has of deciding how to live, like having a deliberate life. You're raising the question of consent and ethic. What does sexual ethics require? And we need to remain historical about that on the one hand, but also maybe not subject her to a kind of strict standard of conventional sexuality either. I think that her relationship to Eliza Reign is very, very, very interesting in this regard. And she speaks. They were 15 years old, and she speaks about how she calls herself. She says she has been giddy, right, because she had other crushes or whatever, and it hurt Eliza Reign very badly, and Eliza Reign exhibited mental health problems. I have no way to guess whether those predated Anne Lister or not. But Anne Lister understood her own fault. I was giddy, as who is not at 15, I have to say. And every time she came to York, she visited Eliza Reign, who by then was very mentally challenged and who pitched accusatory, speeches at her. She never stopped coming to visit her. There was that sense of responsibility. So I kind of don't think it's accurate to imagine that she wasn't, at some level, right, faithful as a friend to all of these different people. If that seems like an answer, I hope, to your question.
I'm going to, just so we can keep taking a few more, but that's a fascinating area to get into. Not that I'm making our entire interview tonight based on T-shirt slogans, but there is a question here about your T-shirt.
Oh.
Is Sally's T-shirt, someone's peering online to see if they can figure this out, "Hope is power,"
Yes.
a nod to the notes that enabled the cracking of her code?
It's not a nod to that, no, I've just got this T-shirt on. I wish it was. I wish I'd worked that out before.
Well done, you cracked the code of what was between the blazer there, but there we go, I had to ask it. Do you think Anne Lister, this is from Bryony, hello to you, would have been interested in empowering or rights for women generally? Do you get the sense that she felt all women should have the right to live as she did, free from societal convention, or did she view herself as slightly separate? You touched on this before about the idea of community. Sally, to come to you first on that.
I think she didn't think in terms of empowering other women. No, I think it was very much about herself. She did often talk about power being with the land, and she did relate that comment once to Anne Walker. So she was thinking in terms of women around her in quite a small way, but I don't think she thought in terms of, I don't know, do you?
No, I agree with you. I think that for a variety of reasons, she didn't think of women as an identity group in the same sense that we may do, in part because if you think about it, you're Anne Lister, you're in Halifax, you do not want to marry a man, but you have ahead of you an inheritance that is going to make that possible, right? Mariana Belcom did not have that possibility. She had to marry to economically work out a future for herself, or so she thought, the family thought. But Anne Lister was not going to question or challenge the very tools that were just in her grasp. And then finally, when she fully inherited the estate, she had the land, right? She had agency. And I think she, if we want to talk about the word identity, I think the land is one of the keys to understanding how she understood identity. Yeah. And that's not democratic.
Well. Yeah.
But it's also like, it's a way she insurgently used things to do what she wanted to do. And that in itself is spectacularly rebellious.
Right, a question from inside this room. Yes. Yeah, well, we went that way. I can see a hand over there. I'm sorry to make you run around. And then there was, where else? There was a hand on this side. Yes. Could we get the mic ready, just to be ready with this woman sitting here who's waving? Hello. Over there.
Hello. I've got a question for Sally. So I guess when we're considering the legacy and then when you're recording that and narrativizing that, how do you choose when to write about, and how do you find what narrative beats to sort of form what is, you know, a complicated and a messy life into a narrative and a story that can develop?
That's a really interesting question, actually. It's hard work. It's really... I get a bit annoyed, actually, when some people describe Gentleman Jack as an adaptation of the Anne Lister Diaries. An adaptation, for me, is like when somebody turns something like War and Peace into drama. I think that must be dead easy, because you've got characters, a plot, dialogue, themes, everything. The diary kind of just isn't like that. And it's... What we've traditionally done so far is take sort of 3 months at a time, read it. I meet with my script editor, producer, executive at Lookout Point, and we kind of talk through what the main themes are. To begin with, we try and think about what the whole series will be. So we will have read like 12, 18 months of the journal, which is what we did for season 1 and season 2. And it's trying to identify the main themes, the main narratives. You know, who's the main protagonist in this section of the diary. And then it's picking out... What I wanted to do was try and give a portrait of Anne Lister and everything in her world in the 1830s, when she was trying to find someone to marry, trying to run the estate, trying to dramatise her world from the household with her dad and her aunt and her sister, then the servants in the household, then the tenants on the land, and then the people she deals with in Halifax. And so I tried to find narratives within the diary that would give me stories that would reflect all those different themes. And it's not an exact science. I mean, the diary goes where it goes, and sometimes you start off on what appears to be a really interesting story, and it just disappears sometimes. So it's like juggling with mercury. It's really it's a really tricky thing to do, but it's equally very rewarding. There was a really interesting story that occurred in the section I've been looking at in season 2, where Anne Lister came to York with Anne Walker, and they'd gone to consult Mr. Gray, their lawyer, not about wills. It was about the division of the joint property of Crow Nest. And one day Anne Walker went off to see Mr. Gray, the solicitor, and Anne Lister went into York just to walk around, and she bumped into Mr. Duffin, who was an old friend. And he was also Eliza Rain's guardian. And he was pleased he'd bumped into Anne, because he was in a bit of a panic because they couldn't find Eliza Rain's will. I'm really excited, I'm going. And Anne, being Anne, said, right, well, I'm going to come and help you find it. It'll be lodged with the solicitor. And they went to the solicitors, couldn't find it. They denied having any knowledge of this will, which was a bit of a shock. Yeah. Then Anne went back to Mr. Duffin's house, and they searched high and low for it. And I was getting really excited, thinking, this is a great story. I can introduce Eliza Rain into season 2. And then the next day she went back. She went to see Eliza. She often did, as Laurie just said. And I was thinking, are they going to find the will? Are they not going to find the will? What's Anne going to do about it? And then she just stops talking about it. So I read on, thinking, she'll come back to it, she'll come back to it. And she just doesn't. So that's a big example of a lot of there are a lot of little bits in the diary like that, where you try and grasp something and it just slips through your fingers.
That's a great example of that exact point that you're making.
So what ends up in the show are things where there is some consistency, where you do get a beginning and a middle and an end. I don't think... I made some things up in season 1, but I've stopped doing that now because there's just so much in the diary you don't need to. But that is... that's really... I'm glad you asked that. Thank you.
So am I. We've got the microphone ready, I believe.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. It's been so enjoyable. There have been a few references made already to mental health and exceptionally strong mental health. Anne Lister's, of course, Anne Walker's rather troubled mental health. Eliza, of course, having been institutionalized for a period of time. I seem to remember coming across somewhere in the scholarship a reference to Isabella Norcliffe also having struggled with her mental health. And I guess I wonder, from your research and reading, do you feel like there is a connection between women living on the margins, experiencing queerness in that context, and mental illness? And part of the reason I ask this is because I've just been quite compelled by the story of what happened to Anne Walker after Anne Lister's death, and the way her mental health deteriorated so seriously that her family essentially committed her. And I kept thinking about what it must have been like to have been traveling with your partner's dead body for months and months and months on end after such a distressing and exhausting trip. And I'm not sure whose mental health would survive something like that. So the fact that she has been historicized as someone of feeble mental health after everything she experienced, it just strikes me as a particularly big injustice, really, in the archive. But I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on this connection.
Well, first of all, I've not come across anything that suggested Isabella Norcliffe had mental health problems. Have you?
I've not seen that.
No.
I've not seen that.
And I think the kind of mental health problems Eliza Raine had were very different from Anne Walker's. So I don't see a connection in that way. I think for me, I don't know a lot about Eliza Raine, to be absolutely honest. I know a lot more about Anne Walker. And I think it's possible to see a connection with Anne Walker's lack of confidence and the fact that she felt other in her world that only made sense when she met Anne Lister. I can't really comment on it beyond that. But what is interesting is when Anne Walker brought Anne Lister's body back, to me, she showed huge character and strength and personality. And I often think that Anne Lister made Anne Walker's mental health a lot better when she was with her and when she had Anne Lister's influence on her.
Was there anything you wanted to say?
I think that's really right. And one of the most interesting problems of representation in this is that you have all the aunts and the tribe talking about Anne Walker's mental health. Then you have Anne Lister reporting them saying that, but kind of questioning it. And being a little sort of skeptical about that. At the same time, you see, especially in sort of the 37, 38 travels, where day after day, Anne Lister writes about how Anne Walker is feeling low. The term is always, well, sometimes poorly, but that's usually more like a physical ailment. She's feeling low. And you see so many occasions where Anne Lister is trying to just kind of lift her up, get her out, ride a horse, take a walk, type of amazing work. And, that's also strain to do that kind of caretaker role that Anne Lister ended up, as far as I can tell, managing pretty well. But that's also hard. I think this is another way I think it's an ethically significant experience to read the diaries, because you realize it's complicated. And the integrity with which she reports, she's feeling low. Any partner, when your partner's feeling low, it's upsetting, right? And so maybe you don't act your best either. But you see all that. There's not a need to editorialize into the self that she thinks some public might want. And so it's a very caring account of a person with, you're connected to, has persistent health, mental health challenges, and how it affects, the other partner. And so I think it's a kind of really interesting, it's better than a case study because it's actually testimony of how it unfolds in real life to interact that way.
Thank you for that. There's a question just here.
I think one of the most interesting things, and it goes all the way through, it's not just in the early period, it goes all the way through, is the sense of somebody trying to find a vocabulary for things that she doesn't quite understand in herself. So she knows what she likes to do, she knows what she likes to have done, but she doesn't have the words for that. And you almost get the sense of someone inventing a vocabulary for something that doesn't quite have a vocabulary. And I just wonder what you do with that as a writer, because for a modern audience, the vocabulary that she uses for intimate things seems ridiculous, but it's all she's got. And so what do you do with that? Do you make her a very knowing character and kind of ignore the fact that she's trying to construct it? Or do you actually kind of go with her trying to find out? I don't know if that made any sense at all, but...
I've never had a problem with understanding what she's saying in terms of intimacy.
No, I think it's that... I think it's that she doesn't understand quite what she's saying, and she's trying to work out how to say it. So there was an example the other night from 1835, where she's talking about her not having quite the same effect on Anne Walker as she used to do.
Yeah.
And she uses a term which is obviously the term that Anne Walker would have used. And then she explains what that term is in pretty biological way. And it's just this sense that the language just sounds very strange, but it actually kind of makes sense to somebody, but not necessarily to her. It's kind of interesting.
I've never felt that when I've read it. I kind of feel I always know what she's talking about. I'm kind of struggling to quite grasp what you're saying, to be honest.
Well, maybe.
But it's certainly true that there isn't a ready-to-hand vocabulary, right? And she comes up with her terms. I think they're easy to understand. I don't really see why she wouldn't have. I don't imagine that she didn't understand what she meant or was kind of grasping for what she meant.
I think she knew what she meant. I just don't think she knew how to express it because there isn't a language to reach for. So she
in some ways,
it.
though, what you could say is it's not that she doesn't know how to express it, but that there was no available way, so she found a way. She built the way. She found the words. And, you know, I'm if you'll forgive a Renaissance reference here, it's John Donne who speaks about the little language such as lovers use. And, you know, those are idiolects. Those are, people make up their own words for all kinds of things in intimate contexts. And so in some ways, it's one more way to see her poetic achievement, if I could push it that far, to coin the terms.
How much of the diaries have you read?
So I've read quite a lot, obviously the 1832 to 1835, but I've gone back to about 1823.
Right.
So I've read as much as there is kind of in that space as it's been happening. It seems to me when she's young, she's actually really struggling with what is going on and what am I? How do I express this? And then but later on, it's still almost how do I find a language for this?
Well, talking of the text itself, another question, so I'm doing quite a bad job of representing questions online, sorry, but I'm trying to read through. I mean, there's just a lot of love as well, which I reflect in a non-amorous way here, but it's very strong, the love. But the thing that, actually, Gary, to bring you back into this, which kind of also speaks to what you're making available, people want to know if they can, if it's all digitised, the archive, can they go and read the wills, the diaries? Is it online?
Some, for the things that we've got in terms of the will, some parts are, some parts aren't. I'm going to stick my neck out, my colleagues will hate me, but I don't think it'd be too hard a job in terms of the wills to get those done. The diaries, though, there's a very active online community, isn't it, that's working through those to sort of crowdsource transcriptions, which is really, really interesting work.
So it's not been done, but people are trying to make it so.
I'm participating in it, so describe it a little bit.
Yes, please.
The West Yorkshire Archive Service put out a call, I think it was in July of 2019, and at this point there are 150 volunteers around the world who are transcribing.
Wow.
And you have to pass a test and show that you can do it. Every single page is being transcribed twice by different people to catch the problems. It's such an incredible archive engagement story, and it very appropriately was awarded a prize from the Archive and Records Association. It was awarded for its, the volunteer project and getting people engaged. Now, it's going to take a while before that's really ready, but it's going to be ready faster than anybody thought.
Faster than an individual doing it on their own.
Oh,
certainly,
no way,
yeah.
no way.
Okay, well that's good. And because the question then was extended, will you make all the scripts available? Will they be online?
The
Apparently you've done this
scripts
before.
are always on the BBC
BBC.
Writers' Room,
They
so
are.
anybody can access those free at the BBC Writers'
They want
Room.
as much of it as they can get, as I'm seeing on here.
But I don't think they go on that until it's been transmitted.
Until it's gone out. And when's that? When's it coming?
We haven't got a transmission date, but it'll be sometime next year.
Oh, come on. I like a date. I like a bit of a news line in the interview. Okay, I think that is all we have time for, because I'm told there may be cake, right? And I like to hit my deadlines on time, so I'm told we are to get that or something of that some description. Thank you so much for educating me, all of us together, for your candour, for bringing all of that, your work to us in such an interesting and beautiful way, if I may say. Some homework for us all to go and do, not least get the will online. And you need to do that other book into a story. And Laurie, you just need to get home well through our COVID times. So please put your hands together for a wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Sally, Laurie, Gary, Emma, for the extraordinary way. I don't think there's any other word for it. The extraordinary way you have collectively brought Anne Lister to life this evening, and with that, what a fascinating and I think appropriate way to mark the opening of the Anne Lister College. We hope our students follow in Anne Lister's footsteps by being as broad in their knowledge and in the pursuit of it as she was, by being unashamedly themselves. The shirt over there, great advice to our students. Exist loudly. So we have a very special cake. So let's wheel the cake in. Christina, thank you very much. I knew we had a brilliant catering organisation in this university, and it's proven once again. So I think Sally and Laurie, you're going to cut it, I believe.
Getting our phones out to take a picture. Wow.
Once you've taken your photos of it.
Oh, and it's got the heck.
Oh, heck, spoken about my fellow Northerners.
It's got the college insignia on. Sorry, I'm just going to take some photos.
Well done.
Take one with Laurie.
It's always nice to see a super fan.
Laurie and Gary. And Emma.
Hi.
Wow,
Okay.
that's amazing. Look at that.
Now, somebody, you've got to cut it.
Cut it.
Yeah. We're not just leaving it in pristine condition. We're going to eat it.
Yeah.
Is it really all cake?
Is it all cake?
Oh my gosh.
Are we starting here?
To be honest, they
Just
don't tell me
stab
that
the
kind of
hat.
thing.
Come on. This is like Merlin. Come on.
I'm not doing it on my
Put it
own.
together? What are we going to do?
Are we going to do that? Have we got an advisor from the catering department?
That's...
Woo!
Good job.
Do I have to get it all the way through?
That...
No, I think we'll leave it there.
Okay, so this is the point at which we really understand the differences of experience of the two audiences in a hybrid meeting. Because for those of you who are here in person, I would like you to join us now in the atrium outside for drinks and cake. And unfortunately, we haven't yet found a way of sharing cake through Zoom. So those joining us online, I'm sorry you can't have any. But thank you very much for having joined us this evening, and enjoy the rest of the evening. I do hope you have cake wherever you are. Thanks again to our speakers, and good night.